Welcome. I'm so thrilled to see everybody here today. This is going to be great. We're going to start with a little bit of full disclosure. And I'm going to just give you a little bit about my background so that you know where I'm coming from. I did the DNA test in June of 2017. So 2 years ago at this time, I had absolutely no idea about anything DNA related. Now, I'm a genealogist. I've been doing genealogy research since 1995, pretty much every day of my life. So I know a lot about genealogy. But one thing that was becoming increasingly clear to me as I had my volunteer sessions and as I went out and did my workshops was that more and more people were asking me about DNA and how they could use it for their research. And I thought to myself, well, you know, you're going to look pretty stupid if you don't learn about it. So I made a choice that I was going to educate myself, that I was going to get the DNA test done, and so that's what I did. And I had a few personal doubts when I decided I was going to take the test, and I'm going to talk about those personal doubts a little bit later. But mainly, I just want you to know that I am not a geneticist, I'm not an expert. I had to take biology twice in college in order to pass it. So I am not the person that is the science whiz here. Everything that I've learned in the last 2 years, I've been self-taught. And my point is that if I can learn it, anybody can learn it. So all of you have an equal opportunity to learn it, just like I did. All right, so without further ado, one of the things that my aim for today is to leave you with resources. In the length of time that we have, and in the amount of voice that I have, we don't have enough time to go into every single itty-bitty, nitty-gritty thing that you need to know about DNA. So I'm going to give you an overview about how DNA works. I'm going to point you to some resources that you can use to teach yourself. And then I'm going to tell you my personal story, which isn't really long. But I just wanted to put a little personal spin on it and just to let you know where I am and one of the reasons why I got involved. But basically, we're going to keep things pretty basic today. We're not going to go into real in-depth, high-level stuff. That's for you to learn yourself. The handout that I have provided should hopefully give you plenty of resources to go into. So when you get home today, you should go home and look on your computer and check out some of these resources, because these are the things that are going to help you with your search. Okay, so that being said, all right, so here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover your testing basics, what to do with your matches, some resources, and then we're going to look at a case study. So the first step in any direction is to take a DNA test. How many people in this room have taken a DNA test? Wow, that's a lot. That's awesome. So you see how far ahead you already are. That's great. So that's absolutely the first thing you need to do. There are 5 major testing companies. These 5 companies are the ones that are doing the autosomal DNA tests that are advertised on TV, the ones where the guy who was wearing the lederhosen had to switch it for a kill. Those are these tests. So these 5 companies are the best well-known. Probably Ancestry, of course, and 23andMe are the best known of these companies. Mostly I'm going to be talking a lot about Ancestry simply because that's the one I'm most familiar with, but we can touch on some of the other ones a little bit as well. So one of the first things that people who are in an adoption situation or in a family mystery situation, one of the first things that you're advised to do is what they call fish in all ponds. And fishing in all ponds simply means that you need to have a DNA test at all of the major companies. So not just Ancestry, not just 23andMe, but all of them. And the reason for that being that you don't know where the tester, who is the person who's going to unlock your mystery, has tested. That's not something you know. So you have probably a pretty good shot at finding decent matches at Ancestry because it is the largest testing company by far. However, the person who you need to solve your mystery may not have tested at Ancestry. Maybe they tested at 23andMe. So you will need to have your test also at 23andMe. And the same goes for these other companies. The good news is that you do not have to pay for 5 different tests. You only have to pay for 2, Ancestry and 23andMe. And the reason for that is that Ancestry and 23andMe do not accept other companies' DNA samples. They only accept their own. However, you can take your sample from 23andMe or from Ancestry, and you can transfer that sample to one of the other companies, either Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, or Living DNA. So you can transfer your test from Ancestry or from 23andMe to any of those other companies. So as long as you know that 23andMe and Ancestry do not accept other tests, then that's really all you need to know. So those are the 2 tests that you would need to pay for. So what happens when you send your DNA in is it generates something called raw data. Raw data comes from any of the testing companies. So if you test at any of those companies, you will get something called raw data. Raw data is downloadable, which means you can take the raw data off of the site that you tested with and download it to your computer and then upload it to a new site. So for example, if you tested at Ancestry and you want to put your data on MyHeritage, you would download your raw DNA data and then you would upload it to the MyHeritage site. And what happens here is that MyHeritage will give you results just like you tested at MyHeritage. They will give you ethnicity estimates, they will give you matches, they will give you everything that you would get if you tested there and you have not paid for another test. So it's kind of fun getting stuff for free. So there are instructions at every site for downloading your raw data. Every site has those instructions right on the site. Any site that accepts raw data for upload will have instructions about how to upload your data. So those are things that you need to look at and to find. One of the things that happens when you download your raw data is you get all kinds of warnings. Warning, you are downloading your raw data. Don't let it fall into bad hands. Keep it safe. So just so you know and don't get scared, you're not doing something really weird. You're just downloading your raw data, and the company is telling you that once the data is off of their website, they can no longer protect it using their protection system. So that's all it is. It's basically just saying that you're taking the DNA, that you're taking your raw DNA, putting it on your computer, and it's no longer protected by the website. Now, it's really not a big deal because all it is a bunch of numbers, and it isn't going to make any sense to anybody anyway. So it's not that big a deal. So we were just talking about testing. DNA testing for genealogy goes back quite a few years. The first tests that were done for genealogy purposes within DNA were different tests. There were Y-DNA tests and there were mitochondrial DNA tests. And both of those tests are very specific in what types of DNA they measure. The Y-DNA measures the male line going straight back, and the mitochondrial DNA test measures the female line, but males also inherit it. So in essence, it measures the mother's line. Neither one of those tests were particularly useful for genealogy, simply because they would go so far back into ancient history that getting matches with real, normal human people that are living today was kind of difficult. But unfortunately, those were the first types of tests, and when those came out, that kind of put a language in the culture that still exists today. There are still quite a few people out there that think that you have to be a male to take a DNA test and to have it make any difference. So that's absolutely not true, because the tests that are being done today are called autosomal. And this little diagram shows you basically what autosomal DNA measures. Autosomal DNA measures the DNA from any of your ancestors, be they maternal, paternal. It just, in fact, measures the DNA that you inherit, period. Doesn't matter whether it's male or female. So it's very useful for genealogy research because your matches are going to be amongst people that came from your father's side and from your mother's side. So you will have both. So one other quick announcement. If you have a question, you can raise your hand and I will allow you to ask, but I have to keep things moving, so we're not going to go off on too many tangents. But if you have questions, please just raise your hand, because I know how hard it is to try to remember your question at the end of a presentation. It's kind of annoying, actually. So if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. Okay, so DNA inheritance, moving on. So how is autosomal DNA inherited? Well, everybody knows we all have two parents. We have a mother and we have a father. Everyone roughly inherits 50% from each parent. Now, it's pretty close to 50%, so it's rough, but it's pretty close to 50%. So you should inherit half of your DNA from your mother and half of your DNA from your father. However, you don't know what 50%. So it's not going to be the same 50% as your brother. It's just going to be some 50% of all of your father's DNA, some 50% of all of your mother's DNA. So this little illustration kind of gives you an idea. Edward and Angela are the parents, and they have 3 children, Gerald, Glenda, and Reagan. Each of the children's names has different letters, just like each of the children will have different DNA. The letters in their names are a combination of the letters in the parents' names, just like their DNA will be a combination of each of their parents. So they're individuals, they do not have the same DNA, they did not inherit the same DNA from their parents. Everybody good with that? Okay, good. All right, so this is a graphic that is pretty interesting. This tells you the amount of DNA that you inherit from your ancestors. Now, one of the things about autosomal DNA is that you are not going to inherit autosomal DNA from every ancestor that you have. It's just not possible. So here it tells you this is the percentage of DNA that you are going to inherit from each of these ancestors. Now, obviously, you're 100% of yourself. You're going to inherit about 50% from each of your parents. You're going to inherit approximately 25% from each grandparent. Now, when I say approximately, sometimes it could be as low as maybe 17 or 18%, sometimes as high as 27, 28%. Just depends on what you get from one grandparent, totally random. As we go further back in time, and we keep going all the way back, by the time we get back to great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, you can see that your average percentage of contributed DNA is 1.56%. That's not a heck of a lot. So it stands to reason, with the average being so low, that some of those great-great-great-great-grandparents you may not inherit any DNA at all from, because others you may inherit 3, 4, 5%. It's just completely random. So sometimes you will see in situations that sometimes third cousins and fourth cousins share no DNA at all. And that's simply because of this percentages and because of the randomness of DNA. So you have 2 family trees, as it were. You have your genealogical family tree. Genealogical family tree is the tree where you fill all the names in with the dates, and this is my great-grandfather, and this is my great-great-grandmother, and it's all the names and all the couples and all the children. And you also have a genetic family tree. The genetic family tree are the ancestors from whom you inherit DNA. And that is not going to be everybody, as we just talked about. So this tree kind of illustrates a little bit how DNA might be inherited. If you yourself are in the middle in the circle, and then your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents go out from you, you can see when you get beyond that level, you start to have some holes. And some of those holes are representing great-great-great-grandparents who you may not inherit DNA from. So that's basically how it is. So just know that you're not going to match every third cousin, you're not going to match every fourth cousin, and don't panic if you don't match a fourth cousin or a third cousin that you know you had. Because it just could be the randomness of DNA that means that you didn't inherit the same DNA that that person did. Okay, we all good so far? Nobody asleep? Okay, good. All right. Now, when we get DNA results, we get 2 parts. Everybody gets 2 parts. It doesn't matter what company you test with, you're going to get 2 parts. One part is your ethnicity, and one part is your matches. So ethnicity is probably the thing that gets the most press. all of the commercials on TV mainly cover ethnicity. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's fairly easy to understand, and two, it's pretty, and everybody's kind of interested. So I've heard it described as the shiny object that they dangle for people to get people to test. So I guess we need to be thankful that they have it, because it is getting a lot of people to test. But I'm here to tell you it's not going to help you with your adoption search. So ethnicity estimates are interesting. They are emerging science. If anyone has tested with Ancestry and they may have noticed that their ethnicity estimate recently updated, a lot of people get really disturbed by that because they thought, hey, I'm 57% Irish. What do you mean I'm only 25% now? People get really upset about that. Well, the reason is because this is emerging science. This is going to change. This is not going to stay the same. There is no exactitude when it comes to ethnicity. And the reason for that is because of how they calculate it. They calculate it from reference populations. Reference populations are something that are being added to all the time. So when reference populations change, testing algorithms change, and then ethnicity estimates change. Now they say they're revising them and they're making them more reliable, and that's fine, that's great, and it's all good stuff, but it's not going to help you with your genealogy at the end of the day. Possible exception might be if you have two very distinct ethnic groups. So say your mother was 100% Scandinavian and your father was Native American 100%. The problem is that very few of us are 100% anything. So when we start mixing in, ethnicity estimates are not a very good indicator, and they're not great for using when you're trying to figure out family mysteries. So they're fun, but that's all we're going to talk about for ethnicity estimates today. Okay, matching. So matching is the real meat and potatoes of testing. Matching is probably the most accurate, reliable aspect of the test. Anybody that you see on your match list is your relative. Now, I have heard of people that try to reach out to their matches and contact them, and they get an answer back that says, "Oh, we can't possibly be related." Well, I'm sorry, but if they're on your match list, they're related to you, 100%. So it's there's lots of arguments about the degree of relation, but they're absolutely related to you. If they're on your match list, they share DNA with you. So that's how we know that they're related to you. So what they do when you send your sample in is they measure your sample against all the other people in the database. So they have all these fancy computers that can do all of this, and they run your sample against everyone that's in the database. Now, the last I heard, Ancestry had 10 million people in their database. Might be more now because they probably sold a large amount of kits for Christmas. So those are hopefully coming in soon. But they have a large amount of testers to compare your DNA against. And I usually tell people who have not tested, I say, the chances of you not having any matches in the Ancestry database are probably less than 0%. Unless you are an immigrant who just arrived here yesterday. Most likely, you will have matches, and generally in the hundreds and sometimes in the thousands. So definitely you will have matches. So your matches, when you see them, they are arranged. The testing companies all arrange your matches by default in order from highest match to lowest match. So the person who shows up at the top of the list is going to be the tester who matches you the most closely. Now, in order for a person to be on your match list, they have to have tested. So if you're expecting to see someone there and you don't see their test, that must mean either A, it's an oops, or B, they haven't tested. So generally it's a matter of them having not tested. You have to be tested to be in the database. So highest match to lowest match is how they're arranged. And the graphic is from MyHeritage. MyHeritage gives you a little bit of they give you an overview that says close family, extended family, and then I have 5,638 distant relatives on there. Okay, so DNA is measured in centimorgans. That's a word that we need to know if we're going to be doing this. Centimorgans is a very important word, and it's a very important number. Each person with whom you share DNA, they're going to give you a number of centimorgans that you share with them. The more you do this, the more you start to learn how many centimorgans are for each relationship. And as you learn about it, you know when you see a new match and they match you in so many centimorgans, you can almost do in your head where you think that relationship will be. There's a couple of relationships that I've got on here, my mother and my son and my first cousin. And all these people, because they're related to me, they get thrown under the bus, so they all have to have their graphics up here, but that's the price they pay. So it tells me that I share 3,465 centimorgans of DNA with my mother. So that's pretty high. That's about normal for parent-child relationship. And then with my son, I share 3,440 centimorgans. So that's right in the same neighborhood. So based on ages, and based on the amount of DNA that we share, they're predicting that Janet Dean is my mother. And that's because her age is with the test, and they know that she's in the range of being my mother, so they're guessing that she's my mother, because she's old enough to be my mother. Under my son, they're predicting that he could be a parent or a child or immediate family member. They're not predicting him to be my son. Why? That's a good question. So if we move to Amy, Amy's my cousin, she's my first cousin, and she shares 664 centimorgans with me. So you can see that's significantly less. She's a further away relationship to me than a mother or a son. She's my first cousin. So that's how much DNA she shares with me. And you can see that Ancestry is giving a range, possible range, first cousin to second cousin. So testing companies predict relationships. They predict. They don't say absolute. That's why they use the wording possible range. They're not going to tell you that these people are 100% a first cousin or 100% a second cousin. Parent and child relationships are about the only relationships that they'll go out on a limb and say, okay, this is a parent and child relationship, simply because of the large amount of DNA share and the range is pretty small. Yes?
What would you expect a sibling to you to have for centimorgans?
Well, if you look at Laura Ruth in there, she's my sister, and I think is that 23, 22, something like that? 28. So 28, 22, something in there. Yeah, it's 2,822.
Okay, so in the thousands.
In the thousands, absolutely, and probably in the 2,000s range.
Okay.
Yeah. So all of the other relationships that Ancestry predicts are going to be in ranges. And the less DNA you share with someone, the larger the range. So close relationships have a smaller range, further away relationships have a larger range. So for predicted relationships, this is one of those range things. Niece and nephew and aunt and uncle are in the same range. They share the same range of DNA. So here we have two people that are labeled as close family in my test. One is Charles Ruthin. I share 1,789 centimorgans with him. And one is Catherine Williams, who I share 1,428 centimorgans. So Ancestry is calling these two close family. And they're also saying their possible range is close family to first cousin. Neither one of these people are my first cousin. Charlie is my nephew, and Catherine is my aunt. So it's giving you a range. One of the things that people tend to panic a lot about when they see these is they'll say, oh my gosh, Catherine Williams is not my first cousin. Something's wrong here. Well, in fact, Catherine Williams is in that range for first cousin, and Ancestry doesn't know that she's your aunt. They just know how much DNA you share with her. So Ancestry is predicting. So keep that in mind. So shared centimorgan amounts produce various relationship possibilities. The lower the amount of shared centimorgans, the higher the amount of relationship possibilities. So here we have a the number of centimorgans for this relationship is 3440. That is 100% a parent and child relationship. This relationship is 445 centimorgans shared. You can see that 84% indicate that it's one of these relationships. But again, we got a lot of relationships there. So if we're looking at a person who shares 445 centimorgans with us and we don't know who they are, we have to go through each one of these relationships to make sure that it's not one of them. So that's literally what we have to do. Yes?
What does the half mean?
Half, okay, so half first cousin means that you share one grandparent. So that's what the half means in general. Half great, well, let's not even get to greats because that's crazy. Half first cousin once removed. The removed is generational, so that's what the removed means, is generations. It's kind of complicated, but there is a resource on your handout that'll tell you about that. Okay, so then, someone you share 25 centimorgans of DNA with, you can look at how many more relationships there are that are possibilities. So the lower amount of centimorgans that you share with someone, the higher the amount of relationship possibilities. Now, this particular data set that we're looking at is something called the Shared Centimorgan Project. This is a great tool because it's based on actual real data. This is based on relationships, actual relationships that people submit, and they're put into this table. So all of these percentages, all of these predictions, these are absolute hard and fast relationships that actually have really happened in real life. So it's based on real fact. So this is what the table looks like for the Shared CM project. I really don't understand the table myself, so that's why I use the portion where you just put in the centimorgans and it tells you, so that's very good. But when you're looking at your matches at any testing company, you always want to look at the number of shared centimorgans. You don't really want to pay too much attention to the relationships that the testing company is giving you. Yes?
Yes. So if you got your DNA, the raw data, and you passed it from, like, say, Ancestry.com down to MyHeritage, when MyHeritage does that testing or they figure out the centigrams, are they basing it only on the raw data that comes down and then they're making comparisons to the people in their database? Or are they really, like, does that raw data bring down the relationships that have already been determined?
No. The raw data is being compared against the testers in the MyHeritage database.
Okay, and also MyHeritage is not using any genealogical information to make that comparison.
Correct.
It's only based in DNA.
Correct. Yes. And that's true of any of the testing companies. So they are only using the raw data and comparing your raw data against the data in their database. So no, the only thing that comes from Ancestry is the raw data. That's it. Yes?
Did you say in the beginning that when you compared your mother and your son, that they didn't say that your son was your son?
Yeah, I don't know why that is. That's weird. I just now noticed that. I guess they feel comfortable in saying that my mother is my mother because when you register the test, you have to register an age. And I would have registered my son's age when I sent his test in, so I'm not sure why they're not doing that. But who knows? Who knows with Ancestry? And it also could have just not shown up when I did that screenshot, and maybe if I went in now, it would show up. I don't know. Ancestry's like that. It's got some bugs. So, okay. So this is absolutely going to become your best friend. So get used to it and definitely learn about it. Yes?
Just a quick question. If you have, since we're talking about adoption, if you have a half a sibling, okay, there's the range up there. Your cousin might also, it could be show up as a cousin or a half sibling.
Yes. My point exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, just be aware that there are many possibilities for relationships, because I think a lot of people take what Ancestry or what one of the other testing companies says at face value. They say this is an absolute simply because that's what they're predicting. And that's just not true. You have to look at all relationship possibilities, and this is very important when you're trying to solve a mystery, because of course you don't know. So you have to use everything. Okay. So another thing to remember that's important is that siblings do not inherit the same DNA. So if you and your sister both get a DNA test done, you're not going to have the same DNA. You may have some that's similar. You may have some of the same matches. A lot of your higher matches are going to be the same. But when you get further down and into those lower matches, 25, 30, 15 centimorgans, they're going to have different matches than you. They may have some of the same, but they're going to have different ones. So it's important to know that your siblings don't have the same DNA. If you have a half sibling, that can be very, very useful for your testing, because when you have this half sibling, the matches you share will be from your common parent. The matches that you don't share will be from the unknown parent, or whatever parent is different. So half siblings are really good people to get tested. Also, another good person to get tested would be an aunt or an uncle or a cousin, because those come from one side of your family. So an aunt maybe comes from the side that you know, and if you test that aunt, then you will know that anyone that matches your aunt is not going to be on the unknown parent's side. So it's always good to test people that you can to eliminate those matches. And one of the things about Ancestry, too, that I should point out is that if you have a parent that you can test, Ancestry has a little filter that allows you to just click on that filter, and that will filter out all of the matches that you share with that parent. And then if you go in and mark all of those, when you go back to your own test, it will, all the ones that are unmarked, go to the other side. So it's a good tool to have. Okay, so siblings are going to inherit slightly more different DNA. So I always like to use the vegetable soup analogy. So your parents get together and they make vegetable soup. And when you dip your ladle in to take your portion of soup, you take 5 carrots, 3 peas, and 2 green beans. And then when your brother comes along and dips his ladle in to get his soup, he gets 2 potatoes, 3 carrots, and 1 green bean. So you can see you're getting the same stew, but you're not getting the same contents. So that's sort of how DNA works. It's very random what you might get and what you might not get. The only exception is identical twins who do share the same DNA. Fraternal twins will not. So we already talked about siblings. You and your siblings will share most of your large matches, but in the smaller amounts of matches, the smaller matches, you won't have the same ones. Some of them will be the same, some of them will not. Okay. So when you start to figure out your matches, you're going to want to start fitting them into your family tree. Well, one of the things you need to do first is to have a family tree to fit them into. So generally, it's a good thing to do to start a family tree and to work on it as you go along and fit your matches into the tree. Now, one of the advantages that I had when I started this was I had very, very extensive family trees for a few of the lines that I had, and you might even call them obsessive. And they had names of people that are still living, and my great-grandparents, all their siblings, and all of their wives, and all of their children. Absolutely, that is 100% the best thing you can do for yourself if you're doing this, is to do a family tree, make it as high and as wide as you possibly can. Now, a lot of times when we do a family tree, we think straight up. We think grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, our direct line. That's normally what we think. But when we're doing testing, we really need to go out. We need to extend those branches out. So genealogy skills, I have to say, are absolutely one of the most essential components of this. You've got to have basic genealogy skills if you're going to have success doing this. And by basic, I mean if you can build a family tree in Ancestry and allow Ancestry to feed you the hints, and you can review the hints successfully, then that's good genealogy skills for this. If you have genealogy skills that you've honed over many years, even better. So genealogy skills are essential, because a lot of the times when you get these matches, they're going to have these little itty-bitty trees with maybe 2 or 3 people on them. It's going to be your job to do their family tree. Not for them, but for you. You're going to be doing their family tree so you can figure out their connection to you. And that involves you using your genealogy skills. So I would say that to have an Ancestry membership to go along with your Ancestry test is going to make your life a lot easier. If you don't have an Ancestry membership, you can do it. Just going to make it a little more difficult and a little more time consuming. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But having an Ancestry membership is going to enable you to do it a lot more quickly and efficiently. So when we're building our tree, we were talking about our high tree. So this is sort of a side-to-side tree, but this is a traditional pedigree chart. It's telling you the names of the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents. This is our traditional family tree. And this is all fine, well, and good. But what we really want is we want a wide family tree. We want not only our great-great-grandparents, but we want all of their children, all of their children's spouses, all of their children's children, everybody, as many people as we can possibly get. And then what happens when you get a DNA match and they show up in your database and you say, oh, look, I've shared 800 centimorgans with this person. You can say, I'm not familiar with this person, I don't know them personally, but they are in the first cousin range to me. Then you go to your tree and you look up their name and maybe they're there because you've done all of this research. Because you know from collecting obituaries and newspaper articles and census records, all of these people are related. So that helps you to identify your matches when you have a very wide tree. Is it an enormous amount of work? Absolutely. It's a huge amount of work. But it's definitely worth it. And that's why Ancestry's automated process makes it easier for us. So besides Ancestry, there are other resources that you can use out there. Family Search is a free option, really good free option. Obituaries are going to also become your best friend because remember, you're going to be trying to look for living people, and obituaries are one of the best sources for finding living people. Fulton History is a great newspaper site that you can use. Find a Grave, gravestone records, perfect. Great place to look. Find a Grave also has a good amount of obituaries on it. Cindy's List is a website that has a cataloging of all of the genealogy websites on the internet. At least that's her goal. So you can go there and you can look for genealogy sites. There's the United States GenWeb project, which covers most states and counties. And then there's Google. Google is also your friend. That's a good place to find more modern obituaries, is Google. So now a little bit about third-party tools. Third-party tools. So third-party tools essentially are tools that genetic genealogists have put together to help us use the data that we get from the testing companies. Now, testing companies all have their own built-in tools. And my advice to you would be to be very familiar with the built-in tools that your company offers. So if you're using Ancestry, make sure that you know how to use the shared matches, that you're using the trees, that you're using every resource available to you on Ancestry before you start going out and looking for third-party tools. Generally, third-party tools vary in their user-friendliness. Some of them are more user-friendly than others. Some of them, I use a few of them, and there are some that I can't wrap my head around at all. So it just depends on who's doing the designing and what the function of it is. So if you're on Ancestry, you want to use the shared matches. If you're on MyHeritage, you might want to use their chromosome browser. You just want to be able to learn as much as you can about the tools on your testing company before you start branching out. So one of the third-party tools that's best known is called GenMatch. GenMatch is a site that was created specifically for the purposes of comparing DNA tests across testing companies. So if you tested on Ancestry and your cousin tested at 23andMe, and you want to compare your tests, you could both upload your raw DNA data to GenMatch. And you would be able to compare your data there. So that's generally what GenMatch is used for. GenMatch has a lot of fancy tools. One of them is a chromosome browser, which is a way to compare shared DNA down to individual chromosomes. And that's an advanced skill, but it's something that might be useful. So this is what your results from GenMatch might look like. And people don't really love it because it's not pretty and it's just numbers and it's, you know, it's tough to understand. But GenMatch has a few advantages in that it gives you the email of the person who's your match, which is nice. You don't get that at Ancestry. It can tell you, you can compare your test with the other person's test one-to-one. You can compare your test against several different tests one-to-one. So it's got a lot of really cool bells and whistles. But again, if you are not that schooled in the tools that your own testing company provides, you're probably not going to get a heck of a lot out of this. Yes?
Can you weigh in on whether there's any credence to the rumors that I've heard, I think some of us might have heard, about how FBI and other, what do you want to call them, government agencies are going to get all this direct information for their own purposes?
That's a subject for another discussion. That's way out of the bounds of this discussion. And really, there's, you know, if you're concerned about your DNA being used to stop criminals, to catch criminals, then don't upload it. It's as simple as that. So it's not, you know, it's not something that's essential. So it's a choice at the end of the day. So using third-party tools, how do we find them? How do we use them? Well, a good source to find how to use things like GenMatch or how to use third-party tools is YouTube. YouTube has videos about everything. If you want to learn how to use GenMatch, you can find a video on YouTube. If you want to learn how to repair your sink, you can find a video on YouTube. So YouTube has thousands of genetic genealogy videos. So if you want to find out how to do anything genetic genealogy, you can check on YouTube. A couple of the ones that stand out for me, third-party tools, are the one that's in the lower left there. That's called the Leeds Method. That is fabulous. I can't say enough good about it. It's something that anybody can do. You literally have to have zero skill in order to use it. And it can tell you a lot. The one in the upper right is another kind of version of the Leeds Method. It's automatically generated though, but the one in the lower left is one that you do yourself. And then of course there are lots of experts out there in the field today. A couple of the names: Blaine Bettinger, Roberta Estes, Leela Pearl Larkin, Sue Griffith. A lot of those are people that are experts. The book, The Family Tree Guide to DNA Testing and Genetic Genealogy, I would highly recommend it. It's by Blaine Bettinger. They have a copy here in the library. I believe they have several copies in the system. So it's well worth getting a look at. It gives very broad instructions about DNA testing, and it's an invaluable resource. So if you see any of those names out and about, then you know that those are the people that are very informed and have a lot of knowledge. So here's a little Leeds Method chart that I just made this week for my cousin whose father was adopted. So her entire paternal line is unknown. So what the Leeds Method does is you take your matches from any testing company, could be Ancestry, could be MyHeritage. You take all of your second and third cousin matches and you list them in Excel or a spreadsheet program or on a piece of paper. And then what you do is you open up their shared matches. So you start at the top with your highest one and you open up their shared matches and you assign them a color. So the top person, I've assigned the color yellow, and anyone that matched them, I've made them yellow as well. So then I went to the next person that didn't have a yellow square, and that was the second person, and I assigned her red. And so I made anyone that matched her red, and so on and so forth. So when we get done with this, what we have is we have 4 colors. Each of these are what I like to call piles, but each of these people represents one grandparent. So each of these people match to one of her 4 grandparents. And this one I liked because it was very neat. There was no overlapping. There was no like same colors, and it does happen. But this one was very neat because you have 4 distinct piles. So now if I go into one of those yellow matches and I've labeled them if they have a tree, I can go into the tree and I can see where that match might fall within the grandparents. So it's very useful, and anyone can do it, and it tells you a lot. All right, so are you confused? Fortunately, there is help out there, and there's a lot of it. There are people called search angels. Search angels are people who will literally take your DNA test and they will run it through for you, and they help people that are trying to solve mysteries, especially. They go into your DNA results, they look at what you have, they analyze it, they use it to make these trees, they use any means necessary to find out who these people are, and they are able to solve mysteries, and they have a very, very big success rate. One of the things that I can mention to you for educational purposes is if you're on Facebook, I would urge you to join a genetic genealogy group if you want to learn. And honestly, it's the easiest way to learn. If you join a group called Genetic Genealogy Tips and Techniques, and that's on your handout, it has probably 30 to 40 messages posted a day. You cannot help but learn about it when you're reading 30 to 40 messages and the answers every day. The same questions get asked over and over and over and over again, and you're going to learn it. You can't help it. So if you're scrolling through your Facebook feed and you're reading the messages that are left on this message board, you will learn it. There's no doubt about it. So it is the easiest way to learn. You can ask your own questions if you want to. The Genetic Genealogy group is Blaine Bettinger's group. If you ask him a question, he will answer it. So he's very accessible. It's wonderful. It's a great way of learning. Honestly, that's probably about 60 to 70% of my education was from there. There are also other groups on Facebook as well as websites for people that are solving DNA mysteries. The Facebook group and the website DNA Detectives, that's a website started by CeCe Moore. And if anybody watched the Henry Louis Gates show this past week, Finding Your Roots, she was on that show. She is probably one of the best known mystery-solving genetic genealogists out there. Also, there's Search Squad. There's websites called Search Angels. Most of the work that these people do is free. They do it voluntarily because they love it and because they're really good at it and they're obsessed. So that's a good thing for people that are looking. So one of the things that's really starting to become very prevalent is the fact that when people get a DNA test, sometimes they find things that they're not expecting. Like maybe that your father really wasn't your father, or there's a lot of stuff like that going on. Fortunately, there are some support groups out there for people. And the emotional aspect of this is certainly something that needs to be considered. There are many people out there that are going through the same thing. So there are support groups for people that have discovered things in their DNA that they were not expecting. And one term that you're going to see thrown around a lot is this NPE. That gets thrown around in the groups a lot. It can stand for not parent expected or non-parental event. So it could stand for either one of those things. So if you see it, you're going to know what it means. Okay, so now we're going to finish up with a case study. And this is my dad.
Lisa,
Yes.
before you, on that last slide, on the lower right-hand corner, I'm interested in the adoption thing. In my family, there's an adoption from Korea, and I presume there would not be much possibility of a DNA match because simply they wouldn't have registered in the database.
You never know until you try.
Okay.
Probably, I would say that website may be able to address things specific to a Korean adoption, because I'm sure that there's many people that are in the same boat. So yeah, I would assume that they would definitely have some advice as far as that goes. There may be one testing company that might be better for that than others. Ancestry doesn't tend to be as international as some of the other companies are. MyHeritage tends to be more international, but I'm not sure how much with Korea. But that would be something that they could probably answer.
One other question. You have on your slides a lot of advice underneath the charts, which is, I think, really valuable. So my question is, Is this presentation downloadable from your website?
No. My main aim was to use the resources that are in here are on the handout. So all of the resources are on the handout. The part that's not on the handout is the explanation. So it's just sort of meant so that you can go and use the resources and see what's there for you in your particular situation. So that's what that's for. That was my rationale behind it. And it also takes forever to generate a handout that has all the text on it. Okay, so case study. Okay, so this is Dad. Dad was born March 21st, 1938 in Albany. Now, my whole life I grew up thinking, okay, I have Irish ancestors. I'm very proud of them. And when I got my DNA test back, well, actually, we'll go into that after, but I always thought of myself as being half Irish because my father was Irish, at least partially. So I always thought of myself in that way. But when I was doing genealogy research, all these years I've been doing genealogy research, about 25 years, some red flags started to come up with some of the things that I looked into. And then there was a few things that got whispered at elderly family members' funerals and things like that. And you know how that is. So I said, well, you know, I'm in a position now where I've got to take a DNA test because I cannot afford to appear ignorant any longer. I've got to get myself into this. So I said, this might mean potentially, because I'm thinking possibly my father might have been adopted. This was what I was thinking because of all the whisperings. I thought, well, what's going to happen to my Irish identity if I find out that my dad's adopted? Well, one theory was that he was completely adopted. Another theory was that I already knew who his mother was because it was a family adoption. So those were my two theories. So I went to my mother. You know, if you want to know something, ask your mother. So I asked my mother. I said, Mom, is Dad adopted, or was Dad adopted? And she said, yes, he was. So there. 50 some odd years of me not knowing, and I asked and she told me. So my suspicions were correct. It had been a family adoption. He was adopted by his maternal uncle. So the man that adopted him was the brother of the woman who gave birth to him. So his birth mother was somebody, I didn't know her personally, but I knew her name. I knew something of her history. So I knew a little bit about her. So that was a big, huge relief because that was the Irish side. So I was like, yay, yay, okay. So before I did the test, I did know that Dad's birth mother was Helen. I did know that. But nobody knew anything about his biological father. My mother said that the only rumor that was around was that he might have been Italian. That was all that was said. No one knew anything. Nobody knew a thing. My father didn't know. Nobody knew. So I go into the DNA testing with this frame mindset. So knowing that Helen is his grandmother or his mother and that his father, we don't know. And my father is deceased, by the way. He's been dead since 1990, so I don't have him to ask. All right, so when I get the test back, this is my highest match. It's a male, and I matched him at 345 centimorgans. And Ancestry is telling me that this is the first and second cousin range. And I'm thinking, who is this guy? I have no idea who he is. My father was an only child, didn't have any siblings. I knew this was not on my mother's side because I know all of my first cousins on my mother's side, so it was not on my mother's side. So I said, uh-oh, this has got to be from the mysterious father. Has to be. So fortunately, this guy had a pretty decent tree. And I was able to figure out based on, well, this is telling us about the centimorgans. So we share 345 centimorgans with him. And these are the possible relationships. And honestly, I'm still working it out, but it could be half first cousin. It could be second cousin. But it's in that range. So he had a tree. He had a decent tree. And because we matched at that level, I was able to surmise that perhaps he and I might share a grandfather. So this is a reasonable assumption, considering that I already knew my dad's mother, and the only missing puzzle piece was the father. So it's possible that we could share one grandparent. So I looked at his tree, I looked at his grandparents, and I looked and I said, okay, which one of them fits the time period, was in the location, and had reproductive opportunity? which one was it. So I found one that was reasonable. And knowing that first to second cousins are going to share, first cousins are going to share great-grandparents, I knew for sure that one of his sets of great-grandparents was also my great-grandparents. The great-grandparents in question had 2 sons. And that was it. They only had 2 sons. So one of them, I'm surmising, is my father's father. So his grandfather was almost exactly the same age as Helen. So I thought, okay, that might be him. The other brother was 10 years older. So, still a possibility, but not exactly. Both of them resided near where Helen lived. So it could be either one of them. So I still don't know, simply because I need more testers. So every day I go on there, keep waiting for somebody else to test. So I did the research. I researched the whole family. I researched both brothers. I researched back. The oldest brother, EJ, was married. He had 1 son. That son is deceased, and he had no biological children. So dead end. No more testers. So FJ, who is my match's grandfather, he married. He had 6 children and 7 grandchildren. So there is the potential there for many more testers. So what I'm actually hoping is that my match's father will test eventually, because if his father tests and he matches me in the half-uncle range, then I have my answer. If he matches me in the cousin range, then I also have my answer. So it's all dependent on the testers. So that's my story. So I know, yes, John?
Can you use reverse genealogy to contact these people and ask them to test?
Oh, sure. I could, but I'm not going to. Yeah, absolutely. Contacting people is definitely something that you should have in your toolbox. One of the complaints that's very common in the Facebook groups especially is that people don't answer when you contact them. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, people just do the test for ethnicity. They're not interested in their family. They don't care, so they look at the test when they get it back, and then they sign out, and they never sign in again. So there's those people. There's people that will get the message but don't have anything to tell you, and so think that if they don't answer you, they won't look stupid, and so they don't answer you. So there's a variety of reasons why people don't reply. Personally, I didn't reach out to him, and I'm not going to. I'm not going to open that can of worms because both parties were married at the time when my father was born. So I am not going there. If they contact me, the gloves are off, though. So that's, All right. So yes, but contact is absolutely an important part of this, for sure. So, bottom line, what's the advice? What advice do I have here for people who want to solve family mysteries? Fish in all ponds. Have your DNA across all 4 companies. I'm saying 4 here simply because one of the companies, Living DNA, has not rolled out matching yet. They're going to, but they haven't done it yet. You need to have working knowledge of DNA basics. So you don't need to know how to use every bell and whistle, but you do need to have a very good understanding and a working knowledge. Genealogy skills absolutely are essential. You've got to know what a census record is. You have to know where to find a birth record. You have to know those things. You need to make your tree high and wide. So not only your direct ancestors, but also the collateral ones. They become very important. And then bottom line is the quality of the matches that you have. If you have some good high matches, then you're going to have a lot to work with. If you only have lower ones, it's going to be a lot harder. So the quality of matches is essential. You've got to have good matches to work with. Okie doke. I've been talking for a long time. Yes?
One other point about having a tree. If you have a good tree on Ancestry and you get a match and both of your trees are available, they will show you your complete relationship chart. So
They'll compare.
they will compare and show you a complete relationship and show your exact relationship.
Yes. If you have everything exact.
Right.
Yes, they will.
Now, the other thing is, anybody that wants to continue learning, next Saturday in Schuylerville, she's giving another talk, right? On your Irish ancestry.
Yeah, so next Saturday is going to be about, it's called Your Irish DNA. So it's going to be more about ethnicity next week. Yes.
How many centimorgans and segments are there?
That's a good question. It's a really good question, and honestly, it's one I've seen asked before on the message boards, and I think there was a lot of debate about it. There's a difference between the actual number of centimorgans and the actual number of centimorgans that are tested. So not every position on every chromosome is tested. And you can see on some of the chromosome browsers. So some of the companies that offer chromosome browsers as tools, like MyHeritage and Family Tree DNA, if you look at their chromosome browsers, on some of the chromosomes, there'll be a little area that'll say not tested. So I don't think that every area on every chromosome is tested, but that's not something that's general knowledge that I know about.
Is an area a segment?
Well, say it could be a part of a segment. Yeah. Anybody else? Questions? Yes.
How does the 23andMe compare to the
In what way?
Well, are they do the same types of results? Or?
They do give you the same types of results in that they give you an ethnicity breakdown, and they also give you matches, but they're going to be different. They're not going to be the same matches that you would get if you tested at Ancestry. On 23andMe, you're only going to get matches of other people that tested at 23andMe. And their genealogy component is not the same. There's really no genealogy component of 23andMe. Anybody else? Yes.
I just joined Ancestry and I checked some of my matches out and gone on their family trees. And there's an awful lot of boxes that are marked private.
Yes.
Does that mean they know who that person is and they put a lock on it? Or is it maybe they don't know who it is? Or?
Anybody who's marked private is a living person. So when you enter a living person onto your tree, they're automatically marked private. So generally that's what private means, is that person's a living person. However, you can mark other people private, you can mark deceased people private if you so choose. Most people don't choose. So generally when you see that private, it means that that person is living. Mm-hmm. Yes?
I'm confused about, you said before, brother and sister might not share the same DNA.
They're not going to share all of the same DNA.
But they would share the
They
same.
will have similar, yes. Your highest matches are generally going to be the same, but your lower ones may differ.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
I done a search my family on Ancestry.com. My family came from Germany on my father's side in 1885. But when I get back over there and try to find them coming here, it's impossible. Because I could find where they were birthed, but I could never find a record that would carry them to their death in Germany, or whether they came here. If they came here, it's almost an impossible way to trace them. Even if the name pops up in this country, you don't know if it's the same person, unless you know who the parents were.
Right. Well, that's a genealogy question, so that's for a volunteer session. Anybody else got? Yes.
You had a slide earlier in your presentation called the Shared Center Morgan Project.
Yep.
What is that? So where can I access it?
If you Google Shared CM Project, it will come up. And it's on your handout under DNA Painter. So it's hosted at the DNA website. But if you Google Shared Centimorgan Project, it'll come up. It's in here somewhere. That's how I usually access it, is by Googling it. There it is. And you'll recognize it immediately because it comes up like this. Yes?
What's the time and place of your presentation next Saturday in Schuylerville?
It's at 1 o'clock, and it's the Town of Saratoga Town Hall in Schuylerville. So it's the big school building. It used to be a school, and it's now the Town of Saratoga Town Hall. And so that'll be 1 o'clock. It's at the Heritage Hunters meeting. Anybody else got any questions? Well, I appreciate it. Yes.
Not really a question, but a comment. When I see the DNA matches and all the surnames that are associated with those, I don't recognize any.
That's a really good point, and that's something that I can certainly address. If you think about it, there's only going to be a very limited amount of people that share your surname. Because if you go back to, say, your great-great-grandparents, and they had 10 children, and maybe 5 of them were boys and 5 of them were girls, well, those 5 girls are going to lose your surname. And they're going to marry and have different surnames. And even if the men, and they do retain the surname, they may have a lot of daughters. So it's all going to depend on, you would expect to see a lot of your surname if every family had all sons. So if all of your great-great-grandparents' siblings were all sons, if all of their children were all sons, if all of their children were all sons. So that's the explanation behind it. And what you could be seeing is a reflection of maybe you have a lot of females in your lines, or maybe people with that surname just haven't tested yet. That's the other alternative.
I had the component tested for the mitochondrial, and that changed my ethnicities, but also added countries that I hadn't seen before.
Right, and again, the mitochondrial follows the mother's line,
Right.
exclusively. Anybody else? Well, I thank you so much for coming out today. And if you have any questions further, I'll be here for a little while longer.